Paris Live guest.
The Consumer Electronics Show wraps up in Las Vegas today. The annual trade show attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors, including 4,500 exhibitors from around the world. Products incorporating artificial intelligence and virtual reality are at the forefront of this year's show. Increasingly, these products are being marketed to children, which naturally raises questions about ethics. Well, for more on this, I'm joined in the studio by my colleague Rosie Collier and also today's guest, Elizabeth Milovidov. Excuse me for the pronunciation of that name. Elizabeth, you're the director and the founder of the Digital Parenting Coach. That's a consultancy based here in Paris. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
And Rosie, you've been looking at some of the products that are being marketed at children and also at parents.
Yes, that's right. And there are many. Let's take a look at a couple of products that are being marketed to children and are on display at the Consumer Electronics Show. There's a Chinese company called Dragon Touch. It's unveiled its latest tablet in Las Vegas this week. And what distinguishes this tablet from others is that Dragon Touch is marketed specifically to children. The tablet comes in two colours, pink and blue, and has a soft rubbery casing. It has similar offerings to most tablets on the market, so games, internet access, apps. And the CEO of Dragon Touch, Li Guo, has been talking to AFP, a news agency, while in Las Vegas this week. And in an interview, he stressed that Dragon Touch tablet has parental control settings and that it's up to parents to limit screen time. And then another company that has piqued my interest is a French company, and it's called Colibri. It's showcasing its latest product, Magic, which is an electric toothbrush that's connected digitally to a screen. When a child brushes its teeth, he or she can look inside its mouth on the screen. The idea is to encourage children to get involved in their own dental hygiene, but it's not clear to me what impact that would have on a child's bedtime routine.
That's incredible. First of all, I want one.
Do you really? Yeah.
I do. I think that's a product that could be marketed also to adults. So Rosie, children and screen time, that's a contentious issue in many households with children. So is this something that's being spoken about at the show?
Yes. Of the tens of panel discussions that go on the sidelines at CES, several are devoted to consumer electronics for children. Yesterday, a session called Is My Kid Tech Addicted raised issues around kids and screen time. The general consensus is that parents must set limits for their children. But recent research published by the British Medical Journal said that parents shouldn't worry so much about whether or not screen time, to limit screen time. The main recommendation was to avoid screen time in the hour before a child's bedtime. Yeah. So there isn't really a consensus yet, which makes it even more difficult for parents. So let's bring in our guest, Elizabeth Milovidov, a digital parenting guru. So my first question for you, Elizabeth, is, what do you advise parents regarding screen time for their children?
First, I would like to say that I do have a Colibri toothbrush. So you can get them here in Paris. They have them and they work quite well. And they work with an iPad where you can actually play games with your children to see about how long they're brushing. So it's very interesting. I think in general, if you go back to the screen time question, it's really unfortunate that everyone puts the onus on parents. And even with the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, who just came down with this sort of no limit idea, I see that parents think that it's a free-for-all and they can do what they want, and they really can't. My number one advice to all parents is to watch how their children interact with their screens and their devices, because then they will know. We try to be very careful about using the term addiction, because really it is a medical term. Just because your child does not come when you're calling them to the dinner table does not mean they're addicted. And so I think that they really have done a disservice to all the parents who are looking for real guidelines and real guidance. Unfortunately, the American Pediatrics Association did not do better. They initially started off saying no screens for children under 2, and then they had a bit more flexibility in 2016. So that's what I think has happened here, is that the Royal College of Pediatrics really is just hedging their bets, and they didn't want to come out and be so stringent or so strident with guidelines because they might have to back up a bit later.
It's very easy for parents to feel guilty about screen time. I mean, I'm sure a lot of parents have shown an iPad or a telephone to children under 2.
Yes, myself included. And one of the things that's so fantastic about technology is that we're using it to stay in contact with our families, to do FaceTime with grandma, etc. But I think overall we need to be very, very careful with what's happening. We need to think about technology. And another advice that I give to parents is just about critical thinking. Before they hand over the device, before they hand over the toys, to think about data protection and privacy, to think about, what's happening with your child. And, are you actually being their digital guardian?
Interesting. Now, Elizabeth, you're American.
Yes.
You're married to a Russian and you live here in Paris,
Yes,
so
I
a good
do.
cultural mix. Are there cultural differences in the way that parents manage screen time? Have you noticed in your various travels to various strands in your life?
Yes, I have seen the differences within my own household, but also in my work as an independent expert for the Council of Europe, traveling in different countries and seeing that there are differences. I know, for example, my husband really would prefer not to have any of the technology that we have in our house. Me as the American, of course, I'm always the first one to want to check things out. But I find that there has to be a mix. We have to come back and find the middle ground, and he's not 100% correct, and neither am I, and I see that in a lot of the countries. Another thing that we've noticed, a lot of the research in the academic level is looking at some of the socio-economic and demographics concerned, because we automatically think, that this family or that family, and we start seeing things like with Silicon Valley and with the engineers, and we hear about Waldorf schools and people who have money who are now restricting the tablets and devices that their children use. And I think that's kind of a sign for all parents to kind of look to see what Silicon Valley is doing and what some of the other parents who have spent the money and who are doing the research, what they are doing. And for us to emulate a little bit of that and a little bit more restriction and critical thinking.
I think it's fascinating, actually. It's just a couple of years ago that Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, came out and said that he was going to limit screen time for his child. So that's really telling, isn't it?
It's very telling,
yeah.
Yes.
Now, studies have shown that teenage girls are twice as likely as boys to suffer social media-related anxiety. Why is this?
Well, again, the statistics, and I'm basing a lot of this off of the Pew Internet research in the United States, in that statistically we are seeing that girls are using social media and boys are online gaming. And so with that comes some of the stereotypes where girls are faced with things like body image, different types of consciousness about what they look like. There are even competitions of am I pretty? These things are horrific, and yet our young girls are being subject to that without always parental guidance, without someone helping them and guiding them. And the same thing with the boys with respect to online gaming, where we find boys in chat rooms saying horrific things about women or about female gamers just because there is not a lot of parental guidance. But unfortunately, yes, we do see that girls have more issues with social media and boys with online gaming.
It's happening at a younger age, isn't it?
Everything is going much, much younger. I did a study on cyberbullying a few years ago for European SchoolNet, and we looked at children 11 to 14 across 6 European countries, and we realized that we were too late. We were too late to try to instill ideas of social and emotional intelligence, to get children to think, to get them to understand ethics and empathy. And we realized that the better model was in Denmark, for example, where they start teaching their children at 3 years old about empathy, about being in somebody else's shoes.
Oh, that's interesting,
Yeah,
Rosie.
really, really. Now, are these issues around online bullying being addressed in schools? You just mentioned Denmark, but here in France, for instance, perhaps in the US, what's the schools doing about online bullying?
Yeah, schools are doing as much as they can, but don't forget they already have a state-regulated curriculum of how much they could squeeze into time. Here in France, there is the association E-Enfance, that they're doing a lot with respect to bullying. In the United Kingdom, you have the Diana Award that does these wonderful peer supporter groups. I mean, people are really trying. In the United States, the First Lady herself has taken up cyberbullying as her issue, her platform. Do I think that really we are getting to the end and we have a solution? No. Unfortunately, I don't. We still need more guidance. We need more parents rolling up their sleeves and talking with their children. Unfortunately, it's so easy to just give technology and kind of stand back without always talking about the implications and the consequences of how we use things. You mentioned, Amanda, that you have children, and when they were little, you would say, you would hand them something and you would say, well, what do you say? And you would coach them and prompt them to say thank you. We're not doing that with our children online when they send emails, when they send chats, when they send messages, because we're not always there with them.
That's an interesting point, yeah.
And then just finally, briefly, I mean, what role can governments play in it as well? I mean, it's schools, but governments, and then perhaps to an extent tech companies themselves in reducing bullying, online bullying?
I think that the tech companies, it's a tall order, and we really need a multi-stakeholder approach. We need everyone in there, and the tech companies are trying. The governments, for sure, again, with my work with the Council of Europe, they just came out with guidelines, recommendations for the ministers for children in the digital environment. The problem is there are so many resources, there are so many really good ideas and best practices out there. The problem is the implementation. That is where we're having the biggest challenge.
Thank you ever so much. Speaking to Elizabeth Milovidov, for a digital parenting guru. Really, thank you ever so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again with this issue will inevitably come up again.
I love it.